Welcome to the Personal Podcast, where we get to meet the real person behind the professional. I'm absolutely thrilled to have Carl Swansbury here with me today, partner and head of corporate finance at Rycroft Glenton. So, Carl.
Charlotte.
Just a reminder of the rules. There's no direct business questions, no small talk, honest answers only, please, and I'm happy for you to flip any of the questions back to myself.
On that basis, I'm really not sure what we're going to talk about therefore, but nonetheless, I'm excited.
Excellent. Carl, what's the biggest challenge you faced in your life so far?
That's a really interesting question because I think perspective is what will allow one to answer that question. And by that, I simply mean along the way, there's been hurdles that I've had to overcome, be it in education, be it in business, be it getting my daughter to brush her teeth on a morning for school. But the reality is, I don't think those are challenges. I think those are just obstacles that are set that you have to overcome. And I think in relative terms, when I see the challenges other people are faced with on a daily basis as a consequence of ill health or otherwise, I actually don't think I've had any notable challenges to have to overcome, Charlotte.
That's quite unique in itself, I think. I really like that answer as well and your perspective on everything. Is there anyone close to you that's facing challenges that you kind of see suffering?
Yeah, I think so. So for instance, my Aunt Dawn, she lost her husband, my Uncle Paul, in November last year. You know, they were childhood sweethearts. He was only 51, died in his sleep. Devastating. She has no one. Well, that's how she feels today. And it's devastating to watch someone who seems to be so isolated despite the people around her. So yes, obviously I see around me all of the time people who are, you know, either in a set of circumstances which they'd rather not be in or are unfortunate. And of course, all you can do is support that person.
Yeah, and it does provide a great perspective, doesn't it? You know, you think you're going through challenges, you might have had a tough day at work, but really not at all. Would you say the fact that you haven't really experienced any real personal challenges, does that impact how empathetic you can be to others?
That's a really good question. So even though I've not lost a direct family member, as an example, and even though all of the decisions I've made in my life so far seem to have worked out relatively well, I don't take those things for granted. And I do spend probably too much of my time actually helping people who are less fortunate, whether it be through charitable work, whether it be just calling my Aunt Dawn on an evening to check in. So I actually do feel that even though I've not directly lost a direct family member, I feel as if I have been able to develop empathy as a consequence of supporting people who have.
Yeah.
So I feel I've seen those things through other people.
Yes, and that's lovely and nice that you're so caring and support charities. What sort of charities are close to your heart?
Quite a few actually. So the RNIB, the Royal National Institute of the Blind, I've done lots of wacky things for, including abseiling down the Baltic, jumping out of an aeroplane for a charitable skydive. As examples, we do, as a firm actually, my firm does a lot for Marie Curie cancer research. The list goes on. Closer to home, I do a lot of charitable work for the Red Sky Foundation, which effectively is all about raising money and awareness for young children who have defective hearts.
Oh my goodness.
So, you know, for me, it's not only awesome to be able to jump out of an airplane, but if we can raise money for charity at the same time, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. How do you prioritise which charities you support?
Yeah, so I think for me, the charities I choose to support are either small charities where I can see the impact of the work that I do for them quite tangibly. So local charities. So the Red Sky Foundation was founded by Sergio Puccini in Sunderland. And therefore, every time I do a fundraiser, I see the impact it has, because it might mean there's a new defibrillator installed in Sunderland. So you can actually go see how you're helping people on the ground. That said, we do as a firm do some work for some of the national charities. And that's because, for instance, cancer, you know, I don't think there's anyone who hasn't in some way been affected or impacted by cancer. So I think we need a cure, and it needs to be researched and it needs to be funded. So I think that is how I assess, which charities I choose to support. Yeah. But it is a difficult one because every charity is worthy of support.
Yeah.
So it is tough.
There's so many, and you want to support them all, don't you? And
you do, and I find myself doing so. So only on Sunday did I get wrong off my wife, because we were walking out of B&Q having bought some paint because we're painting our spare bedroom currently, and I found myself enrolling to be a donator to Shelter.
Yes, another great charity.
But I was stood at the doorway of B&Q for half an hour filling in forms. My wife was trying to drag me away. It's just because I love to do that, because if you can give, you should, and if you don't, I think that's quite ignorant, personally.
Absolutely. Well, good for you. What's the biggest kind of charity challenge you've ever done then?
Well, it depends if you're asking a challenge that's personally caused internal anguish for me or the impact it's had. I think the biggest charitable challenge I've took part in is definitely a skydive, because I think the concept of jumping out of an aeroplane isn't something that comes natural to me, at least.
No, not for me either.
And when those doors open, your feet are hanging, and obviously the guy that you're doing your skydive with is waiting for you to give the signal, which is a tap on your shoulder. Yeah, not my greatest moment, but nonetheless, I'm still here. So that was probably the most personally nerving charitable experience. I think the one that was most impactful was the Red Sky Ball, which was in March this year, where we raised £120,000 for the Red Sky Foundation in one night. I mean, that's phenomenal.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
What was your secret?
We worked hard. We had 450 guests, and everyone donated significantly. Wow. So I think the right people in the right room, can achieve a lot. Oh, lots of alcohol. Yes, beyond midnight, who knows what happened? But we raised significant amounts of money for the charity.
Oh, amazing! And I just want to know, what was the final thought that went through your mind before you jumped out of the aeroplane?
It could be worse. And I appreciate that seems like an odd thing to think at that time, but it could be worse, because everything's relative. And, you'll probably find during the course of this podcast that I always compare every situation to other situations, and therefore in relative terms, how important is it? How devastating is it? Because there's always someone, I think, who is in a more interesting, worse predicament than you.
Yes, that's a really interesting concept, and one that I do believe in as well. And I do say to myself quite often, but sometimes a friend once said to me, but hang on, you're in this moment, you have to acknowledge how you're feeling as well. You can't always just brush it off and say, but it could be worse, someone else could be worse. So it's maybe one of the lessons I've learned along the way. But on that subject, and kind of in terms of relativity and the perception of things, are there any situations you've been in that you perhaps didn't find challenging, but other people might? Yeah,
I think probably one recent example is COVID. I think that first week March, we were all doing what we were doing, going about our business, our lives in the way in which we always had done. And within 1 week, the rug was pulled, and we were all told to go home, stay at home, don't see our friends, family, work remotely. We were all just sort of catapulted into this odd, unusual set of circumstances. So a lot of people would have found that overwhelming, difficult, isolating, depressing, all of these words. And of course, I understood that some people may find it difficult, and certainly friends who live alone became isolated because they were forced into isolation. People who didn't have families, maybe didn't have the ability to have support when it comes to childcare, as examples, because schools were closed. So lots of challenges, but for me, I only like to think about things I can control, because there's zero benefit in spending your life thinking about things you can't control, because there's no tangible benefit in expending energy that way. So, I just very quickly was able to acknowledge that it was what it was, and therefore I recalibrated quickly. And I mean within 1 day, and then we moved on. So yes, I think COVID was the time where I probably supported more people who were going through challenges, but actually I just managed to change gear quick.
Yeah, definitely. For me, it was about, again, comparing it to other situations. I just thought of everyone in the war, you know, and there were quite a few memes flying around at that time, you know, all they're asking is for you to stay at home, think about what they did for you in the war, you know, to save the older people who potentially could lose their lives through COVID. So I remember, I mean, it was kind of a very scary situation as a business owner. And I remember going into work that day where I knew the decision was going to be imminent, or maybe they'd made it and they were going to say from 5 o'clock tonight. So kind of, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. It's kind of, and it's crazy. It was only kind of 3 years ago. It was like, but it's still history now. And I just remember saying to everyone, I stood by the photocopier, and I wasn't sure if people were going to lose their jobs because there was no furlough scheme announced at the time.
Well, that's right. That's right. No, I remember exactly that time as well, because myself and my 14 business partners met in this room, and we effectively talked about how we may look to navigate what was going to be an uncertain period of time. And as you say, at that time, we didn't know about furlough. So, you know, clearly we had to look at our infrastructure, we had to look at our headcount, we had to look at how we would deliver our services remotely. And it was a really harrowing time, but I thought it was fascinating at the same time.
Yes.
Because actually, you know, I back myself to be able to be incredibly fleet of foot. You know, I am able to cut through weeds quick and get to the point. And those types of individuals are the types of individuals who have come out of COVID better.
Absolutely.
Versus those who were overwhelmed, anxious, and as a consequence probably spent, you know, a year and a half just feeling very difficult and very anxious about everything. And of course, you know, that was something I just wasn't willing to allow to happen to me and my business.
Yeah, and what about personally? How did COVID affect you?
Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, I'm a big family man. I've got a big family, a big friendship group. So to be told you can't socialize with your friends and family was devastating. You know, our daughter then was probably, Charlotte, 4.5. So, you know, she loved being with her friends and my parents and my wife's parents. So it was obviously not great. But, you know, we made the best of the situation. It forced me to spend, I say forced, I shouldn't say that in case my wife watches this podcast, but it encouraged me to spend more time with my wife and my daughter. You know, normally I'm out of the house by 6 a.m., home midnight. So I really didn't spend much time with my daughter in her first 4.5 years.
Wow.
Bath time didn't happen. So I did bath time every night, which was awesome. Obviously, we had a nice summer, didn't we, that first year? So, you know, we had some barbecues, you know, some time in the hot tub. So, you know, we just made it work because there were many good things that came out of a really difficult situation.
Definitely. And you've got to see the positives, haven't you? Otherwise,
that's right.
What's the point?
But it comes back to perspective, doesn't it? So I chose to see the changing environment as a positive, but not everyone did. And I appreciate why. But, you know, for me, that's a mindset thing, and you choose how you think.
Totally. No, I agree with all that. And we'll come back to kind of work-life balance later. But in terms of still your outlook on life, so how do you handle quite stressful situations?
Yeah. So I'm really quite fortunate in that what I do is incredibly stressful, very demanding, very intense. So I've almost professionally been brought up in a stressful environment, which means over time, actually, you just find ways of processing and coping.
Right.
Ways that you probably wouldn't have been able to appreciate if you didn't work in such a high stress, high tempo environment. So, you know, if I'm in a stressful situation, Charlotte, you know, what I will always do is stop. I'll ask myself, if I've got 10, 15 things that are essentially important, what is important and urgent? I'll prioritize, and then I literally break each of those tasks down into small, digestible chunks. So rather than saying, right, you know, I want to go run the Great North Run, which is quite an overwhelming thing to commit to, I'll say, right, this week I want to run a mile. And I want to run a mile under X number of minutes. 2 miles, 3 miles. And before you know it, you can run the Great North Run really easily. So that's how I manage stress. I break it down into manageable bits, which makes it more attainable and achievable. And therefore, actually, you are in control, and therefore you feel less anxious, less stressed.
Brilliant. Yeah, make it sound easy. But
Yeah, and that's took 20 years to
Yeah.
master because 10 years ago, if you'd have asked me that question, I wouldn't have answered it like that.
Have you read Stephen Covey since?
I have, indeed. Yeah, no, I mean, a great author slash enthusiast and someone who I actually day-to-day practice.
Brilliant. No, a lot of wisdom in that. I know he's written other books as well, but I think I've just read that book of his. Apparently his son's written a few books now. 4 Laws of Execution or something like that.
I've not read that book, Charlotte.
Apparently I haven't either, but apparently it comes highly
4
recommended.
Laws of Execution.
I think so.
Okay.
Something like that. 4 in Execution might be in it.
Okay.
I might be making up a lot of
I'll
nonsense.
grab myself a copy because I've not heard of that book.
Okay, I'll check it exists first for you.
If not, maybe you've just agreed to write a book.
Yes, why not? You know, I've got plenty of time as well.
There you are.
Okay, so going back to your childhood, or just growing up at least,
Mm-hmm.
were there any defining moments for you?
Defining moments. And what do you mean by defining moments?
Okay, so maybe like they just stand out for you, or there was something that happened to you that changed you, maybe personality-wise, or for some reasons, there's moments in my childhood, like the one that's coming to my mind right now, because it's all about being honesty. I'm just going to say it. Playing golf naked when I was 4 years old.
Oh, I'm glad you disclosed your age because I'm thinking, oh my God. Playing golf when I was 31 naked.
But yeah, that would maybe define you though. But for some reason, I just remember walking up and down the slopes. It was crazy golf, so obviously you're allowed to be naked, especially when you're 4.
Sure.
Maybe I was a bit younger actually.
I'll agree with you just to make you feel less awkward, but keep going.
Thank you. But yeah, just things like that, just random moments stick in my brain. Maybe it defined me in some way. I don't play golf anymore. I certainly don't play golf naked, but maybe that's where I was going wrong. But yeah, anything like that. Have you ever played golf naked?
I'm delighted to report I've not played golf naked, so I don't have a defining moment like that. I think the only sort of moment that immediately springs to mind, so I'll share it with you, but I'm not sure it was defining, but it probably has hugely impacted my outlook on life.
Okay, that's perfect.
So probably one in the same thing is, so when I was younger, my mum and dad had a holiday home in Stanhope, which is in Weardale.
Oh, I live right nearby that.
Do you?
Yes.
Where do you live?
I live in Walsingham.
You're kidding me.
So I go to, there was a doctor's there.
So we live just outside of Bransford.
Oh, wow.
So we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later. But yes, so we had a holiday home in Stanhope. So every Friday, my mum, my dad, my grandma would pick me and my brother up from the school gates and we'd go away for a weekend. And that was every weekend because, of course, as a young guy, 7, 8, 9 years of age, you're outdoors, in the countryside, playing football, playing cricket, playing rounders. I mean, it was fantastic, right? So we still love it. And those are the memories that I can recall very fondly from like the age of 6, 7, 8. But the reason I share this is so my grandma was just part of the family. She would be with us every weekend. She would often be at my mum and dad's home. She was the closest person to me, save for my parents and brother. Sadly, she passed away when I was 13. So that was the first time I'd lost someone that I loved dearly. And, I was relatively young at 13. And obviously it was devastating. To watch my mum devastated was as devastating as the feeling of loss that I had.
Yeah.
But what it taught me sort of really early on reflection is that take nothing for granted, take no one for granted, and live each day as if it is your last, because one day you'll be right. So when you asked some questions earlier about sort of my mindset and outlook, it's always with that in mind. I take nothing for granted. So I don't come into my business on a Monday and go through the motions because I might not return. And therefore each day I give my all and I give my best. Because I need to know that I have no regrets. Because one day, when we're all sat and, everything is said and done, I don't want to regret anything.
Yeah, I have a very similar mindset in that respect as well. My granddad died when I was about 3.5, so I remember it, and I remember the impact on my family. Very, very blurry images in my head when I recall it, but yeah, it was a shock, the sudden nature of it.
That's right.
And I think that's something that lives with me, maybe subconsciously. So when I'm saying goodbye on a morning, now I've only just recently found out this isn't normal, I quite often will think, this could be the last time I see you. This is just my husband and my kids going to an everyday activity. Now people say, oh, that's really morbid. And it is, and I wish I didn't think like that, but equally at the same time, it makes me treasure every moment.
I don't think that's morbid, Charles. I think that's a real positive, actually, because it does just mean you don't take anything for granted. So perhaps we're just the odd ones out, and perhaps we are both just morbid, but I think exactly like that. So this morning I left the house at 5:45. My wife and daughter were fast asleep, and I kissed them both, and I looked at them, and whilst it was really subconscious, I probably thought what you just said. I looked and I remember just appreciating my daughter.
Yeah.
For no reason other than, she's precious. And that's the image I want in my mind.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad I found someone who thinks like me.
Yeah, no, we're probably just odd together.
Yeah. We're finding out we have a lot in common.
That's right.
Do you ever, because this is something, again, I've finally put a label on, I tend to catastrophize a little bit as well.
Okay.
So, and for usually good reasons, sort of bring out the best in me. I could think, well, again, it's that very similar life lesson that you could lose everything tomorrow, so live your best life today.
Yes.
But yeah, the situations, it's almost like a risk assessment that's gone out of control. So I will, again, I'm painting a terrible picture of myself, but walking through a car park, I wasn't naked. It was the other day, I had my clothes on, and I just thought this could all cave in on me. And I thought,
okay.
And that's a bit grim, isn't it?
So you're quite anxious then, quite a cautious person?
No. So this is the other side to it. I just think, so what? I'm still going to walk through the car park, still going to crack on. But yes, You're right. Thanks for reminding me. Life's quite fragile. So yeah, it's almost like this conversation in my head where I'm like, well, you're not putting me off doing things. It doesn't stop me, but it's just annoying that it's there.
Yes, interesting. Yeah, so I don't have that sort of nervousness. I don't have that degree of inbuilt caution.
Yes.
I think my focus on taking nothing for granted is quite conscious.
Okay, yeah.
It's not a subconsciousness on my part.
Yeah. Interesting. And so going back to education, when you were younger, how did you do at school?
Did well. I mean, I really had to work hard to do well. We've all got friends who were just incredibly gifted, didn't turn up, walked into the exam hall and got A stars straight. That wasn't me. So I went to Farringdon Comprehensive School, which is a comprehensive school in Sunderland. A pretty challenging school for those who wanted to do well, because the teachers spent most of their time, having to manage the unruly kids at the back of the classroom that were setting people on fire with Bunsen burners and the like. So it wasn't exactly, the learning establishment that perhaps I will send my daughter to, but it was what it was. It was the school that was closest to where my parents lived, and therefore that's where my brother went, and of course that's where I went, right? So I worked hard. I was doing okay. I asked my parents for additional support, so they had me a private tutor on a Tuesday and Thursday evening.
You asked for that?
Indeed, to do math and English. And that was probably me subconsciously at the time, knowing that I needed to do more than the school was going to afford me.
That's quite insightful as a young person.
Yeah, it was, and it's because I am just motivated, and I've always been motivated. So regardless of, what it was when I was younger, if it was sport, if it was academia, if I'm going to do something, I want to give it my best, and I want to do well. So that was probably me acknowledging that I knew I could do better than I was doing because of the lack of support I was being given. So I think because of that extra tuition that I was receiving, sort of outside of school, which also was probably quite clever on my part, because I probably wanted to keep in with the cool kids, but wanted to academically perform, which meant more work outside of school.
Did you tell them you're having tuition?
Absolutely not. I think this is the first time I've disclosed that.
Oh, an exclusive, thank
externally, exactly. And as a consequence, managed to do phenomenally well at my GCSEs at all of my friends' surprise, because they didn't know what they didn't know. And of course, I said it was a fluke. Some of us are just naturally gifted, which wasn't true. I worked too hard for the grades that I got at GCSE. That got me into a Catholic sixth form. I'm not Catholic. Right. I'm not religious, but the college my friends went to, again, wasn't the right learning environment for me. So I chose to break away. So went to a really good Catholic sixth form in Washington called St. Robert's, did 5 A-levels, came out with 4 A's and a B, and joined PwC as a consequence. So those 2 years were life-changing. Because if I'd have gone to Bede College with all of my friends who are still my best pals today, I wouldn't be sat here, for fact.
Really interesting. And you say you just always had this inner motivation. Where do you think that came from?
I think it came from my parents. So both of my parents are from very working class backgrounds. Both of my parents were born in Sunderland from big families. Their parents, were blue collar workers. Both grandparents and grandfathers worked down the pits. So, a very, very working class upbringing is what my parents had. And I saw my mum and dad work very, very, very hard when I was young. So my dad is a builder, my mum is a carer, and they were literally tag teaming for my entire childhood. And by that I mean, mum would look after us, dad was at work, dad would come home, mum would leave. That's just what they did because they wanted to provide for us. And as a consequence, my brother and I always appreciated what hard work meant. And we could see how from nothing they created, in relative terms, the lifestyle that they wanted for their children, for me and my brother, which I'm really grateful for. So I think it is the upbringing that I had and observing what my parents were doing that I think has always motivated me and my brother to be just very hardworking. And we both know we can achieve anything because my parents, in relative terms, have achieved much more than you might have expected given the start in life they were given.
Yes. Yeah, I always remember my mum telling me that I could be anything I wanted to be in life if I put my mind to it.
Exactly.
It's that positive self-talk that kind of echoes around your brain in tough times as well.
That's right.
Whereas, not every child, it's not necessarily, and again, I had a very privileged upbringing, but it's not necessarily that. It's almost those words, the choice of words that they use to help motivate you.
Well, it is. And obviously now, many years on, I've read The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, which I think is one of the greatest books of all time.
Right.
And I believe in the law of attraction. So, rather than just want big things, which is what everyone wants, I find, I now am very clear about what I am going to achieve over what period of time. And I visualize that achievement, that success. And 9 times out of 10, it's fascinating to see those things just attract themselves to you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't think I read the book ever. I watched the film years and years ago.
You should read the book because it's 100% more impactful than the movie.
Okay, yeah, and it's I probably don't take enough time to visualize things, and setting intentions. I quite often will. I'm ambitious, but I quite often go with the flow as well.
So you would hate what I have in my loft. So and so I was telling you earlier that we're currently refurbishing some of the rooms in the house as a consequence of being up and down into the loft space. So we found my old mood board, which is one of those old cork boards that you would stick pins into. And effectively that was a visualization board setting out all of the things that I knew that I would achieve by when, which of course is fascinating. Bearing in mind, I prepared that about 20 years ago.
And have you achieved everything?
Most of those things.
Brilliant.
Some of those things I wouldn't have achieved yet, given my relative age. But yes, it's fascinating to see that I was visualizing things that I've pursued since, unintentionally.
Oh, yes. No, I believe in that. It is backed up by science as well, isn't it? And
it is.
Yeah, they're very interesting. But I think a lot of people place too much emphasis on the kind of the mindset thing, like if I think this, it'll happen. There also needs to be kind of a carefully constructed plan and a lot of action and hard work as well that goes into it.
Correct.
So yeah, which I'm sure obviously you put into it as well. And so education-wise, you don't have a degree?
That's right, I don't. So my sort of formal education as far as sort of classroom education finished at sixth form when I did my A-levels at St Robert's.
And straight into the corporate world?
Yes, so the plan, my thinking at the age of 16 was to do my A-levels and then go to university because that's all we know to do, because that's what everyone seems to do. And I think that's what all of the teachers at my sixth form were encouraging us all to do. So I had my place at Durham University to study law, but I had a huge itch and the itch was to pursue employment rather than to sit in a classroom for another 4 years. And by total coincidence, and this was a coincidence, so certainly not great planning on anyone's part, PwC were advertising a Flying Start program, which effectively meant you could join PwC straight from A level and train to be a chartered accountant without a degree. And it was the first time that PwC had this program. So I became aware, I applied, I interviewed, I got given an opportunity to join the firm, which, at the age of 17 is quite phenomenal.
Yeah.
We're the biggest accounting firm in the world. So in my mind, I said to my parents, this is like a great opportunity. What I should do is join PwC for 1 year, almost like a year out, if you will, of education, get a year of paid employment under my belt, and then go to Durham University to study law. But I think I'll be much more employer-friendly post-degree than if I have not ever worked for a professional services firm. Did that, and of course, there was then no need to go study law because I had a great first year with PwC. They said, Carl, we want you to stay. I was promoted, and by the age of 20, I was the youngest ever qualified chartered accountant in the UK.
That's amazing.
But by total chance, that certainly wasn't by design.
You never know what fate.
Well, you never know. And I always knew I'd be in business, and I always knew that I value time. And, what I've never been one for is taking a week to do something you could do in a day, because you're just wasting 6 days otherwise. So I think in my mind, I will have been visualizing the ability to run fast versus going to university and then going into a training contract for 3 years. So I probably saved myself 4 years.
Oh, yeah.
So that was probably my thinking.
Definitely. I mean, I loved my time at university, but I don't regret any of the things I did there, but I regret the time, I wasted a lot of time. And
yes.
I remember calling my parents because I was swimming. So I was swimming about 10 times a week before I went to university,
Wow.
morning and evening, and school in between. And again, really driven, wanted to achieve the best grades. And I remember getting to university, and actually before I went to uni, I had a year out because I got ill, and that was a whole other story. So anyway, got to university, first week, calling my mum and dad, I was like, I'm bored. There's just so much time and there's not enough to do.
See, that would have drove me up the wall. I couldn't waste time.
Yeah.
Some people don't mind just sitting idle. That isn't something that I can ever do, which is probably why I had in my own mind concluded that whilst I had a place at Durham and whilst I would go to university because it's what every single tutor at my sixth form was telling me I had to do, it probably wasn't what I wanted to do, hence why I had an itch to scratch and found myself at PwC in an interview. I mean, that certainly didn't just happen. I can't recall sort of the nuances as to how and why, but I think on reflection, I will have known that I wanted to run faster than a degree would have allowed, I suspect.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, when I started my business, I think I did more in a day than I do in a whole term, arguably a year sometimes of my degree. And it doesn't need to be dragged out. I know there's a lot of kind of different courses now. And
that's right.
Doing them.
And everyone's different. So I appreciate, for certain professions, you have to go to university. Yeah. And some people want to, they want the life experience, they want to go travel, and that's great. But for me, I knew that I wanted to go into business. I knew I'd be an advisor to business, be it an accountant or a CF advisor or a lawyer. I knew that's what I wanted to do. So, I ultimately decided on the most efficient route to achieve that. I mean, it's funny because still to this day, I'm 39 now, so you would think people wouldn't ask questions about your degree. But even now people say, do you feel you missed out by not going to university? And obviously I can't actually answer that because I didn't go to university, so I don't know what university life would have been like for me. But, what I always say is, academically, I'm a chartered accountant, and therefore, respectfully, that supersedes anything that came before that. And in terms of, the ability to travel and great people to be met and great places to see, I've done all of that. But when I've traveled, I've not gone with a backpack and I didn't travel by bus, I've managed to see great places slightly differently as a consequence. So, hey, horses for courses.
Oh, definitely. And yeah, I much prefer the luxury travel route.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
But do you ever feel that you're negatively judged for not going to university?
Yes, definitely. I mean, whilst no one would say that, and whilst clearly people are professional in the way in which they would observe one's career, the reality is, I remember at PwC, I was part of an intake. So, big four firms hire regionally sort of 20 to 30 trainees per annum. Most of those are graduates. Most of those are from brick universities. Most of those have a first. So clearly, when you are not a graduate, not from Oxford, you're definitely a different type of trainee, a black sheep, perhaps. So definitely I could see, just based on body language alone, that some of these graduates that I was sat alongside and was friends of, they definitely couldn't understand why I was there, and they were probably internally questioning, was I worthy? Because they'd gone to university, they'd earned the right, and I hadn't. So for sure, people will have had that view, and no one ever verbalized that, but they didn't need to. I'm intelligent enough to read someone's body language to know that that's what they thought. But again, there's two ways you can deal with that, bearing in mind you can't control how someone perceives you. So you could either let it get you down, and I'm sure it did for some of the other trainees that joined on the same basis as I did nationally, because there were 5 of us nationally who joined the firm at the same time. So we would get together every 6 months as a cohort. And some of these guys would struggle, they'd be in tears, they'd feel marginalized, they'd feel as if they did not fit. And I understood that because I could see why they'd reached that conclusion. But I'm just focused on my reality, and I knew exactly why I was there. I knew exactly what I was trying to achieve. And quite frankly, if that's the view they want to carry on an uneducated basis, that's their call.
Yeah, it almost drove you further.
It did. As soon as someone sort of tells me I can't, I will. And as soon as I see a red rag, well, I will not rise to the occasion, because often there is something more important beyond that. But for sure, it wasn't easy. Again, as a 17-year-old, looking back, now it's just water off a duck's back. But at the time, it probably had a bigger impact than I'm suggesting now, but I just can't recall really. But yeah, it wasn't great. I mean, we talk about sort of inclusion and equality now much more than we did then. But I definitely think within PwC at that time, there was a huge amount of discrimination against people who joined not with a degree, not from a brick university.
Wow.
And I think that's terrible, because actually, what a business needs to thrive is people who have ability, have core skills and competencies, but from all walks of life.
Absolutely. And, it is a very topical issue at the moment in business. How do you think businesses can be better to encourage equality? Sorry to interrupt, but just a quick word about our sponsor, Be Daily. I've been subscribing to the Be Daily now since starting my business. It provides relevant and informative information directly to my inbox, not just about the North East, but also national news. If you're interested in subscribing, we'll put the link in the description box so you can get the business news directly to your inbox. Now back to the podcast.
Well, I think that's a really good question, because it is super topical, and it's quite depressing. It's topical.
True.
Because it shouldn't be a topic.
Yeah, good point.
For me, first of all, it comes from the top. And I think to make sure you are not in any way discriminatory, be it based on social class, gender, sex preference, race, you have to be clear about the values and the technical competencies you are recruiting. If you are, then actually there should not be any ounce of discrimination in the way in which you go about building a business. But sadly, there's too much vagary in recruitment processes, and often the person recruiting does discriminate, intentionally or not. And therefore, it is a inbuilt issue which can only be addressed when the people at the top appreciate it's an issue. I mean, it's funny because when people talk to me about, for instance, board representation, and there's reference to things like there has to be at least 2 female directors at board level. I mean, that for me is discriminatory, because why does there have to be 2 female directors on the board of a business? I don't understand why there needs to be a quota.
Yes.
Because of course what's right is that there is around a board table the right ability and skill to help a business thrive, and if that's male or female, so be it. So I think actually this sort of desire to encourage equality is actually, I think, encouraging discrimination. I
do agree, and I am female, and as a female, you don't want to be just placed on a board because you're ticking a box.
There you are. And that does happen. And I think whilst it's good to raise awareness of the need to have inclusive businesses, to be inclusive in all walks of life outside of business, I don't think having a quota is the right way.
The only argument I can see for it is the kind of role model kind of perspective. Sometimes people need to see it to believe it. And if they can see females achieving on boards, then it might make them realize it's possible, I can do this, so I work hard for it.
Yes.
Still don't think it's right. Maybe there are other ways, or making a bigger deal out of the ones that are there on merit. But equally, it's negative role model if it's just because they feel they're only there because they've met the quota.
And worse still, if someone is placed onto a board not based on competence or ability, it actually completely undermines that person, their appointment, and it goes the other way, doesn't it? So, I mean, for me, it's hard to understand why businesses do have to have prescriptive guidelines as to how to make sure they are not discriminatory in the way in which they run a business, because for me that's an assumption, but I appreciate everyone is different.
Yeah, it does get my back up a little bit as well, especially when you have to tick and fill in boxes about the age, sex, race. What annoys me still today is, the little boxes where you have to say if you're a Mr., Mrs., Doctor. Like, why is that important?
Well, there you are. And it shouldn't be, unless you need to have a particular qualification or skill set to do the job in hand. But as I said, Charlotte, for me, when we as a firm recruit, we will have an absolute clear set of values that we will be assessing the person against. So, are you someone that can be trusted? Do you collaborate? Are you good at communicating? Are you someone who is conscientious? Do you put people first before yourself? The next set is technical competencies. To be a tax advisor, you have to be C-tier qualified. Are you? And if you aren't, you can't do that particular role. So for me, it should be really straightforward to recruit the right person for a role without needing to even ask yourself, am I being discriminatory? But of course, the problem is people are sadly guilty sometimes of discriminating. And therefore, sometimes, we're all penalised as a consequence of the actions of few.
Yes, it's a shame, but it is true. And you've mentioned kind of some of the values in the workplace there. What are your personal values that you hold close to your heart?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think the things that are really important to me, first of all, conscientiousness. So I absolutely put everyone before me. And it's probably one of my greatest strengths and probably my biggest weakness.
Yeah.
My wife goes wild because I would drop everything for a friend who wouldn't do the same for me. And I would know that, but I still would do it. And we've all got the friend who comes to you when they need support or comes to you when they've had a tough week, and they're not there to support you in return. And my wife will often say, Carl, why do you bother with Bob or Sarah or whoever else? And my response is, because it's the right thing to do. So I think definitely my number one value is conscientiousness. I really care and I put everyone first, which I think is right. I'm very trusting. So if anyone ever wants to talk in confidence, they know that I appreciate what in confidence means. And again, not everyone you can trust.
No.
I am just trustworthy to the highest standard. I'm reliable in trust, and by that I mean if I say something, I will do it.
Yes.
And if I can't do it, I'm going to tell you, and I'll tell you why. I think I'm also very sort of clear. I'm not sure that's a value, more of an attribute, but I'm very clear about everything. And by that I mean, some people are quite vague, non-committal.
Yes.
You can't really pin them down. I'm black and white. And of course, no one's black and white, but I choose to be quite prescriptive because I like people to know where they stand.
Totally.
And I like to know where I stand.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
And I think the final thing that I'd say is a really important value to me is sort of friendship and family. And that might feel a bit sort of intangible, but the thing that I prioritize over everything is my friendships and the relationship I have with my family.
And is there a priority between those two?
Well, I mean, the cliche, you can pick your friends and not your family is important for a reason. So, hey, my family and friends are all as important in different ways.
And that's lovely to hear that you really appreciate friends and family, but also you work such long hours. How many hours do you work in a week?
Probably between 55 and 65.
Okay, and is that just Monday to Friday or does it flow into the weekend?
Yeah, it spills into the weekend, but in a very sort of fluid way. So, I'll not be sort of doing 10 hours on a Saturday.
Yeah.
But there'll definitely be times where I'll be doing sort of 6 a.m. till 10 a.m. on Saturday morning, clear the decks before spending time with my family and then picking up again Sunday as an example.
And how do you find that, like juggling since your daughter's come along?
Yeah, it's not easy because, I think we've all got lots of demands on our time, be it our business, be it friends, family, daughter, children, hobbies, other business interests outside of your core business. So, we've all got so many demands on our time nowadays. It's tough, but, what I choose to do is to prioritize. So I'll do the things that are important and that are going to deliver the greatest output. The challenge, though, is establishing what outputs are important. Because one could be guilty for assuming I meant the greatest financial output, and that's not what I value. So an hour with my daughter, in relative terms, is invaluable to her, and therefore that output's important to me.
Yeah.
So you just have to prioritize. I think the one thing I've learned to do is to not allow my time to be wasted, which gives me more time, which I then can use to prioritize important, urgent tasks.
Yeah. How would you define wasted time for you?
Yeah, so if I go back sort of 10 years, when I didn't value my time as much as I do now, and therefore I would give it away, I'd know before a meeting with a professional connection that nothing would come of it, but I'd still attend the meeting.
I know what you
I
mean.
would never do that now.
Okay.
Because why would I give someone an hour of my time to achieve nothing when I could spend 1 hour with my daughter on a Saturday? And that's how I now value that 1 hour. Whereas pre my daughter, I guess I had more time to give. Whereas now I'm really precious. The only commodity that I value is my time.
Definitely, it's made me more ruthless in that respect. I can still always be better. How do you always get around that then? Say someone wants an hour of your time, but you don't kind of think that they deserve that hour of your time. It's quite a harsh conversation if you're going to be blunt and honest with them.
It is, and it doesn't come down to deserving of time,
Okay,
because I think
yeah.
everyone should be given the value of time. But it's more about understanding what one wants to discuss. So, if you were to drop me an email, say, and you say, Carl, hey, can I catch up with you next week? 10 years ago, I said, of course, Charlotte, let's book something in.
Yeah.
Now I'd say, Charlotte, I'd love to catch up with you. What is it you wanted to chat about? You might say, oh, Carl, I'm thinking about acquiring a business, just say as an example. I'd say, great, Charlotte, sounds interesting. Tell me more about the business you want to buy. You might say, oh, well, I've not really gave that any thought. I say, well, why don't you give that some thought? You set out the parameters of what a good acquisition looks like. We'll then get together. 9 times out of 10, that means the meeting never happens, because it was something that the person hadn't really thought about. They've then themselves concluded it's not going to happen. So they've saved themselves and myself time. So I've helped them prioritize and not write off their own time, because some people will write off their time because they've got time to waste. I've also saved myself time. So that's how I approach every situation like that now, and that's in a business and non-business setting.
Okay, yep.
And as a consequence, 9 of the meetings that you thought you would have had, you no longer need to have, because there's nothing to discuss.
Very interesting. I will be practicing that as well.
You should. It's life-changing.
Absolutely. And why do you work so hard? At the minute, there's lots of kind of articles, there's lots of podcasts even about, hard work is bad sort of thing. You shouldn't need to work hard.
That's right. We all need to do 2 hours a day on
Yes.
a hybrid basis,
Absolutely.
and everything will just come good.
The rest, all self-care.
That's right.
Relaxation, spas.
Indeed. That's right.
So, yeah, but
Sign me up for that.
that's not real though, is it?
No.
It's not
It's
real
not.
life.
It's ridiculous. And to encourage anyone to think that you can achieve great success by doing very little is at best misleading, at worst total BS.
It's cruel. I think it's cruelty, especially to young people.
It is.
Especially coming out of university.
That's right.
As well, when they have put their money, time into it, and they are being told, you shouldn't have to work necessarily a 9 to 5.
That's right.
It's very interesting.
4-day working week. I mean,
Yes.
my dad was only afforded that luxury at the age of 62, having worked for 45 years. So for a graduate to think that that's afforded to them without any experience of doing anything is certainly a fascinating conundrum.
It is. Yeah, it baffles me. But at the same time, why do you work so hard?
Yeah, it's a good question. Why? What's my why? So I think there's 3 reasons why I work so hard. I think the first reason has been, it's becoming less now, but the first reason has been financial independence, because I think fundamentally, we all have certain desires and aspirations, and often there is an economic cost to that. We all want to give our children the right upbringing. We all want to live in an appropriate home. So financial independence has driven me. Certainly, up until recently, that was a key driver, becoming less so now. The second reason why I work as hard as I do is because I like to achieve and to take advantage of opportunities as they are presented.
Okay.
And that's probably in part as a consequence of the work ethic that my parents have instilled in me. But it's probably also as a consequence of me having to overwork to achieve, because I think if you think about my education and my early years with PwC, I think I was on the back foot.
Right.
And as a consequence, I've always had to almost sort of work harder than everyone to compensate.
It's interesting you say that. I've spoken to 2 other people who've said the same thing. They said they had nothing to fall back on, so they knew they had to work really hard.
Yes.
So yeah.
That's right. And then I think the third reason is, I am not someone who will ever be comfortable with the concept of expecting without giving. So anyone who knows me would definitely say that Carl is really supportive and Carl will always give you without expecting in return. That's what people would say. And of course, because of the law of attraction, I always pay it forward. So there's a sort of strategic reason why that is what I do, but it is what I do. So as a consequence, I will always work harder than the people in my team. I will always practice what I preach. And no one will ever not see that I'm tangibly pulling in the direction that I'm encouraging everyone to move in.
It's important, isn't it, to walk the talk?
I think it is. I think you talked earlier about, the new way in which we're all encouraging people to think one can work, hybrid working, 4-day working week, but yet we all want 25% pay rises. It's a fascinating set of circumstances which economically clearly is not sustainable. So my absolute train of thought is that if you want to achieve in anything, be it swimming, be it squash, be it as a corporate finance professional, you have to work incredibly hard. And to achieve significant success, you do have to be someone who will work harder than the majority. And, our business here at RG, we are the largest independent advisory firm in this region. Our aspirations for the business are significant. And clearly, to realize those aspirations, we will have to work harder than other firms in this region. It's a competitive market. So I think for me, I am willing to do what's required to achieve. And hard work is just part and parcel of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm no stranger to hard work myself, but it does sometimes take a toll on me, on my physical and mental health.
Absolutely.
Have you ever experienced that?
All of the time, genuinely. So thankfully, I've never been sort of medically unwell as a consequence of work-life balance, stress, etc. But on a regular basis, I can see that I'm close to burnout. On a regular basis, I feel physically done, mentally done. I'm really self-aware, however, and as a consequence, I know where the line is. So, if I'm having a really demanding, stressful day or week or month, and I can see I've burnt the candle at both ends, I will stop. Because if I don't, something will give. And clearly that just would not be appropriate or good for me or the people around me. So I do think as a consequence of having a young family, as a consequence of being able now to be more selective as to where I put my time, I think that I am able to make sure that I don't step over the burnout line. But I tell you, I'm often on the edge of it, and it's only moments away.
Oh, me too. Teetering sometimes.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, it's really. I mean, I think it's, for me, the biggest challenge that we as professionals or people in business or people with a busy life, the line we're always definitely treading is the one of being productive, working hard, to being exhausted and burning out. And I think that the fine line is very fine. I think the thing that I absolutely do all of the time is make sure that I'm checking myself, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I need to get better at that as
and
well.
have people around you who will do it for you. So my wife has absolutely no issue with saying, Carl, you look exhausted. Carl, you're sharp. What's wrong with you? And that's enough. She's telling me a lot without saying anything.
Excellent. You can always rely on your partner, can't
That's
you?
right, indeed.
To give you the harsh truth.
That's right, you've got it.
But you need that. You need that.
You do, because sometimes you can't see it. And of course, it's marginal. So each and every day, if you work a little bit harder, you don't know how you've changed.
Definitely.
It's like when you go to a dinner party and you see a friend you've not seen for 6 months, they will see you differently to the way you see yourself. So I do listen to people around me, and I've got 3 mentors who mentor me outside of business. And they are really helpful in that regard as well, because they'll not see me any time during a quarter, but they see me once a quarter. So they can sometimes help me recalibrate if I'm going too far.
Interesting. And recalibrate is actually the right word, isn't it?
It is. It feels like, sometimes I'm in sort of seventh gear, and after a 2-hour mentoring session, I drop down to fifth. And of course, you can be in seventh gear now and then, but you can't sustain that. You will definitely conk out.
Definitely. We talked about managing time, but for me, as I'm getting older and having a family now, it's more about managing my energy levels.
Correct. That's right.
And I could have a 10-hour working day at home, but it's all quite steady away. Or if I'm doing things like this, podcasting or presenting, it does require that seventh gear sometimes.
Well, it does. It's physically and mentally exhausting doing something like you're doing now. So, you've got to, as you say, find gears and use them appropriately. But to be in seventh gear for 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's not for everyone. And, only a few people will be able to sustain that over a prolonged period of time. And, the one thing that's really important to me is the compounding effect.
Yes.
So, I don't think you have to burn out. What I think you have to do is work hard consistently over a prolonged period of time, and you achieve success. It looks like overnight success, but it's not, because it's what you've achieved over a sustained period of time. But that's the one thing I think most people really fail to achieve in a world where we all want instant gratification. And if we don't get it, we will find somewhere where we can get it, which of course is why people find it really difficult to commit to a career or an employer for a prolonged period of time, because there's always a bigger, better, brighter environment, isn't there?
Absolutely. And it's a whole other conversation that we don't have time for on this chat.
Correct.
But I will ask one more question before we move on to our regular questions. Based on the fact that you're an early bird, I wonder, do you have a morning routine?
I do. Yeah, I do. So every morning, 5:30 a.m. alarm buzzes. That's Monday to Friday, not a weekend. I'll always do a quick half an hour jog. So probably sort of 20 to 6 to 10 past 6. Okay. Back home, quick shower, porridge and out, and probably into Newcastle for about 7:45. I get the train from Durham to Newcastle. Oh,
brilliant. Excellent.
And therefore, normally at my desk, raring to go with no emails in my inbox by 8 a.m.
Awesome. I love it. Mine used to be quite similar, but I've got quite a young baby. So it's out the window for now.
No, I'm pretty fortunate. My incredible wife, Wendy, she affords me that luxury because she is super kind, and she wakes up our daughter, gives Esme her breakfast and takes Esme to school. So I'm fortunate that my wife allows me the freedom to follow my routine Monday to Friday.
Brilliant. It's a team effort, isn't it?
It is. You've got it.
Brilliant. Okay, the regular questions. So these are the quickfire questions. They don't always end up being that quickfire, actually. So, okay. We'll just go with it. Okay. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, I will ask you to rate yourself at the following.
God, okay, this sounds dangerous.
Yes, it is. And remember, it's what do you think personally?
What do I think?
Yes, okay. Not what other people think, not what your wife thinks.
Are you going to corroborate my answers?
Yes.
Can we just assume what I say is factual?
No, Ryan goes away, does his research.
This is dangerous.
How good looking are you?
7 out of 10.
Brilliant. How funny are you?
5 out of 10.
What are your cooking skills like?
0 out of 10. Horrendous. I'm a good eater of food, but I cannot cook.
Okay, well, you're halfway there, really.
That's what I think. I appreciate great food, however.
Brilliant. How good at singing are you?
9.
Really?
I'm not singing on this podcast.
Well, I'm not going to make it, but I think that's the highest score we've ever had.
I'm actually a very good singer.
Really?
So I sing swing music. It's like Frank Sinatra, Rat Pack, my era.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. No, I sing all of the time.
And I'm not going to ask you to sing that.
I'm not going to
sing. Are there any recordings anywhere or any YouTube footage?
Probably.
Okay, just maybe a Google later, just to back that up.
No, you'd agree. Well, I hope you'd agree.
No, I love that. I love that. Yeah, we've heard a lot of people. It's generally the lowest score, I think, the singing one. So
no, I'm really self-aware, so I know my strengths and my weaknesses, and I can sing.
It's funny, actually. I said to myself last time we were doing this, we haven't found a singer yet, and here we are.
Here I am.
Alcohol drinking.
10 out of 10.
Yeah, good tolerance.
Phenomenally well trained. Yeah. Good tolerance, and again. That's a sport I'm very proficient at.
Do you find that's important for the job you do?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, I do lots of client entertaining. We host lots of events, but of course, you could do that without needing to have a glass of wine. So no, I don't think it's essential. I enjoy having drinks socially, but by no means essential.
Do you find alcohol's quite good at slowing your brain down sometimes?
It depends on the volume
Yeah.
that you consume.
That's true.
Well, see, it's interesting because I'm actually, surprisingly, I'm actually quite an energetic person, having had drinks.
Me, yeah.
So yeah, so I'm like, so people describe me as a Duracell bunny after beers. So no, it doesn't make me relaxed and somber.
Yeah.
It does the opposite.
Yeah, no, I'm very similar for the early on, but then once you get through, to be fair, I don't really drink that much these days. But,
Right.
I'm quite enjoying that. But
No, yes. So I've got a bar in the garden, etc., and it's often frequented. So yes, 10 out of 10.
brilliant. Parenting skills.
I'm going to say 7 out of 10 because I think that I'm a phenomenal father when I'm there.
Okay.
I'd love to spend more time with my daughter, but as we all know, there's a balance. And I think I've found the greatest balance I can find at this time.
It's the thing I most struggle with mentally.
Yeah, I think we all want to spend more time with our children. But, you know, it's funny because the principle of that is clear. But actually, I think it's quality of time that matters the most. And when I'm with my daughter, she gets everything. She dotes on me. We've got a brilliant bond. Last night, she fell asleep on my chest. I wouldn't want a better relationship. So therefore, actually, what would more time give me? So it's an interesting one. I think we all say we want more time, but do we benefit from more time or do we just do the same things more often?
Yeah, really good question.
Yeah.
How good a friend are you?
A really good friend, 10 out of 10.
Awesome. How intelligent are you?
8.5 out of 10.
Great. And how kind are you?
Well, so I'm going to have to provide context to this answer.
Okay.
So I would say that I am 10 out of 10 kind. I'm really kind. I'll do anything for anyone. I do think that if you ask some people that question, and the reason I say this is because I have asked that question recently in an appraisal process, and actually the feedback was quite surprising. People said that Carl is very generous, but because he's so busy, he doesn't afford us his time. Which was interesting because that therefore
It's a bit of a conflict.
suggests that I'm not kind with my time. But of course, I believe that I am. But if I am otherwise engaged, you can't be in two places at once. So it's just a fascinating conundrum.
It is. Yes. How are you kind without using your time?
Yeah, so I will do anything for anyone. I will help
nice,
people.
isn't it?
It is, but it's, well, not necessarily. So for instance, and if you were moving house and you said, Carl, you know, I'm not really sure which mortgage broker to deal with, I would help because I'd introduce you to a really brilliant mortgage broker. If you said, Carl, you know, I need to move some boxes and my removal man has let me down, can you help? I can because my client owns a removal company.
Okay.
So I'm incredibly helpful and resourceful.
Yeah.
But what I probably couldn't say is, oh, don't worry, I've got nothing on for the next week. I'll come and move your boxes for you because I'm not likely to have the time to do that.
Yeah.
So I think it's funny, isn't it? Because a lot of people say what your kids want is your time, nothing else. You know, they don't want money, they don't want nice things, they just want you.
Well.
And I think that's the way I took that upward feedback. You know, people said they want more of my time. You know, I understand that. I think it's a sort of partial compliment, but the reality is, you know, we're all busy people. So I do think I'm very kind because I always like to help, and I take real satisfaction in helping, which I think is only something you would feel if you're kind.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Did we get a score there? Maybe you did say.
I think I said 10 out of 10 would be
10 out
my
of 10.
own self-assessment.
Okay. Well, that's what it's all about. And the final one is how good at sex are you?
Good at sex.
Yeah.
Okay, well, with my busy schedule, you know, the frequency of sex is as frequent as, you know, me cooking is. So the volume isn't there, but when it happens, it's great.
Okay.
So I'm going to say 7 out of 10.
It's about the quality, isn't it?
It is. Well, thank God it's about the quality, because if it was about the volume, it's, you know, 1 out of 10. But yeah, 7 out of 10 I'm going to go for.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carl.
Pleasure.
Hi, it's Ryan from Harvey and Hugo, and I am the videographer here. So, are you looking for a new way to stand out in today's crowded digital landscape? Well, look no further than podcasting. Here at Harvey and Hugo, we specialise in creating and producing high quality podcasts that engage and inspire audiences. And with our comprehensive production services, we'll take care of all the technical details, from the recording and the editing to the distribution and the promotion. With millions of listeners tuning in every day, it's the perfect time to start connecting with them on a deeper level. Let Harvey and Hugo help you unlock the power of podcasting and take your message to the next level.